Today I'm going to talk about the second commandment, which is actually means word or utterance rather than commandment. Can you hear me? Okay. The commandment says, or the utterance, Lo yihye lecha Elohim acherim al panai. And Natalie and Pat touched on that before me. The literal translation is this: You shall have no other gods upon my face. All non-Jewish English translations read, You shall have no other gods before me. Likewise, the Greek Septuagint, however, the Latin Vulgate has rather a polemic interpretation. You shall not have alien gods before me. The English translation is really strange gods, but Latin alienos actually means foreign, outsider, unworthy, and others. We may detect here a move to delegitimize any other deity, including the one in the Hebrew Bible, because for the Christians, their God brokered not only a new covenant, but his essence is somewhat different than the old type of deity. In the Vulgate, we find many such polemic changes. What is the literal meaning of you shall have no other gods upon my face? Targum sensed the problem by reading except me, but this suggests the existence of other gods besides our Adonai. Rashi recognized this dilemma and therefore he wrote, The verse speaks of gods who are not deities, but rather they are recognized as such by others who made them deities. He then rejects the Aramaic Targum Onklos, saying, It is wrong to interpret other gods as except me, because it is defamation of God in heaven, to even compare the two with equal divinity. He then adds that upon my face means as long as I exist. It is quite rare that Rashi disagrees with Targum. However, this last point does not address the problem of other gods, because the philosopher might argue that God exists as long as mankind recognizes him as such and validates his existence. If mankind does not recognize a deity, then it is inconsequential whether it is with a large or a small g. Ibn Ezra, the theologist and astronomer, opines that the reason for saying other gods comes to focus on God himself, lest one believe that God designated an angel over the universe. Another reason is to discourage mankind from making statues to diminish or control the power of the upper heavens, or what the astrologers called the heavenly wheels. The last argument reflects the 12th century theorem on the relationship between man and nature. Other gods, according to Ramban, comes to warn against confusing Adonai with the angels and the hosts of heaven, who are also called Elohim, as well as against other types of gods, such as gods of molten image or gods of gold and silver. As for upon my face, Ramban writes that God watches every man who makes and worships his handmade idols, whether covertly or overtly. Or HaChaim warns that if one begins to worship one idol, he may end up worshiping many. The commentaries on this verse are numerous, but all point to one deduction, This command presupposes the existence of other gods. Yitro himself, a few verses earlier, admits that just that when he declared, "Now I know that God is greater than all gods." And in last week's parasha we read, "Who is like you, O God, Ho Adonai, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders?" In fact, we read it every Shabbat, thus keeping this ancient theology alive. Yet, no one would suggest that this is the theology we have all been espousing since Parashat Yitro. We read a beautiful, sublime poetry that our forefathers, or probably Miriam herself, composed in a moment of ecstasy. We should also remember Jacob, not too long ago, who uttered with great surprise after God appeared to him in his dream at Beth-El, where he introduced himself as Adonai. Wow, this is what Jacob said. Wow, there is Adonai in this place, and I did not know. His idea of Adonai, of God, was very myopic. We don't know where he thought God resided or if he had heard Adonai before. He then sanctified the stone he used as a pillow and called the place a house of Elohim, not Adonai, a portal to heaven. Why didn't he invoke the name Adonai? Because he was not certain about this new deity. He then makes a bargain with this unknown God. If Elohim remains with me, and if he protects me on this journey that I'm making, and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, Adonai will be my God, my Elohim. This reminds me of a brat, an ungrateful teenager, going off to college. Before he leaves, he tells his parents, "Listen, you two, you want to see me again? Then pay my tuition as long as I stay in college. Provide me with enough money for clothing, food, lodging, partying, car, and so on. And then I shall recognize you as my parents and give you credit for my success in life." Another problem in this verse is the plural form for the name of God, Elohim. As you can imagine, this generated multiple commentaries. Chizkuni, for example, suggests that as the manna tasted differently by different people, so were the utterances. Each person felt that God was addressing him individually, so each perceived what he heard according to his own cognizant ability. This commentary is supported by the use of the singular throughout the 10 utterances, such as lecha, to you, and the singular of who brought you out of Egypt. The book of Deuteronomy elaborates on the phrase other gods 16 times. When it rewrites the 10 Commandments, probably in the 7th century, that is 5 to 6 centuries later, it describes other gods specifically from the gods of the surrounding nations. The description is still local, not universal. A few chapters later, Deuteronomy further elaborates on the other gods as those you have not known. Does it exclude the Egyptian gods? They knew them. Yet later on, it specifies even more. You and your forefathers. Chapter 29 elaborates further. Gods whom they had not known and whom Adonai had not allotted to them. Now, this is very strange. The idea of the allotment of gods to the world nations is found in Parashat Ha'azinu, verse 8. When Elyon, this is the supreme God, gave nations their inheritance, when he divided the sons of El, that is God, he then fixed the boundaries of peoples in relation to Israel's numbers. but a portion of Adonai is his people. Jacob is his own allotment. Not only are the names of the gods those of Canaan's mythology, but the idea of the separation of the legitimate deities among the nations clearly stated. The only new theological thought is that Adonai is supreme over the rest of the deities. This theology is found also unambiguously in our parasha, when Yitro claimed with awe in very similar words Jacob uttered, "Now I know that Adonai is greater than all gods, all Elohim." Yitro did not convert to Judaism of Moses, as some contend, but rather sought a covenant with Adonai and his people who were going to pass through his land. And anyway, Moses was a family after all. And Pat also mentioned the reasons, some of the reasons why Yitro came to meet with Moses. We find Yitro's exclamation very similar to that of Solomon centuries later, when Solomon tells Hiram, the king of Tyre, that he was going to build a great house for God, because our God is greater than all other gods. In chapter 28, the Deuteronomist describes other gods as images made of wood and stone. At this phase in the development of the Israelite theology, in approximately the 13th to 12th century BCE, it is clear that Adonai was the God of Israel, a God who acted for and on behalf of a certain ethnic group. About a century later, as recounted in the book of Judges, God refused to save the tribes of Israel from the various foreign oppressors. They begged and prayed, but God responded, whether seriously or sarcastically, "You have forgotten me and worshipped other gods. Go cry to Elohim you have chosen. They will deliver you to in your times of distress." It seems that we find here a belief that other gods had their own power to help their own worshippers. Another century passed, and Jeroboam, king of Israel, formed 2 golden calves to represent the God who had brought the Israelites out of Egypt. This enraged the Deuteronomic author, who accused Jeroboam of worshiping other gods. The king is depicted as one who had acted worse than all those who preceded him. This accusation is unjust, because before Jeroboam, there were David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. Solomon was undoubtedly the worst of all who preceded Jeroboam. But this assessment came many centuries later by the pro-Davidic dynasty historians. Well, it all depends who writes the history. So when did real monotheism begin? Well, not too fast. It certainly did not emanate from the people or the kings, not even the priests, but from the prophets. In the 9th century BCE, King Ahab was mortally wounded. He sent a delegation to the Philistine city of Ekron to seek divine counsel from their god Baal-Zevuv. This enraged Elijah, who sent a message to the king saying, "Is there no God in Israel that you go to inquire of Baal-Zevuv, the god of Ekron?" Here is a kernel of monotheism, in which other gods are considered to be useless, powerless. In the same 9th century BCE, the prophet Hosea similarly depicted other gods as powerless, as he said, "She did not know that I gave her the wheat and the wine and the oil and the silver." Israel believed in powerless gods. Amos, Hosea's contemporary, called the other gods delusions. Isaiah in the 8th century BCE believed in the exclusivity of Adonai and foresaw a time when Adonai could alone be elevated and all other gods would vanish completely. The three major prophets of the 7th century were even more specific. Isaiah, this is the 2nd or 3rd Isaiah, stated unequivocally, "I am Adonai and there is none else." Could be clearer. The prophet Zephaniah mocked the syncretic behavior of the Judahites who were worshiping both Adonai and the gods of their neighbors. "I shall cut off those who vow by the name of Adonai and those who vow by the name of Milcom, the god of Moab." Deuteronomy 32. Now I take you back to Deuteronomy from the 7th century. The Ha'azinu poem, which I attribute to the prophet Zephaniah, states passionately, "Adonai alone did guide Israel, no other God at his side." He then continued, "See then that I am he. There is no God beside me." Other gods, the prophet declared, are but abominations. Again, this pure monotheism cannot be clearer, and this is only 7th century. In Babylonia, it was Ezekiel who ensured adherence to monotheism. When Ezra and Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem with the exiled, and this is 6th century, monotheism was generally the norm. There were some intermarriages with local women, but with the insistence of the two leaders, these marriages were dissolved. Rabbinic Judaism took hold since then to this day. To summarize, we have seen a belief in Adonai as the God of Israel who allotted legitimate gods to other nations. For centuries, the theology moved from syncretism of worship to the dismissal of any power to those gods, and then to their delegitimization and the exclusivity of Adonai, the creator of the universe. The latest development is inherent in the Kabbalistic theology of emanations, attributes, and the void created by God himself to grant humanity free will. Shabbat Shalom.